want to hit this, bro?
Got bladders too, though?
Yeah. I'm sorry.
They got bladders now.
My wife is downstairs.
Man, they ain't got nothing.
For which one?
Medical law fecal.
What's fecal? That one?
Yep.
Okay. You want me to sign that?
This is one right here. He said it hasn't been a minute because he used to go to East Orange High.
Face looks familiar.
Yeah, let me see if he got no more pictures.
I had a nice time at the building.
We get this for folks.
Because he still calling you things like get beans. I'm like, nah, man, he got my Shdeed now, man. Good brother, though.
Yeah.
He has a son by my daughter's son.
Oh, really?
So that's how me and him was like still in cahoots, like conversating. He's down there too in Tom's River with my daughter's aunt.
Okay.
But I'm down here now. I'm in Egg Harbor.
Egg Harbor?
Yeah, so I'm in Atlantic County now.
Mashallah. It's good seeing you, man.
You too, bro.
Alhamdulillah. Love you too, man.
I'm still support you. You come here.
Often. I usually post it on Facebook.
Yeah, that's how I knew. Then you messaged me back.
Right.
Yeah.
Wafikum.
No, may Allah, ease your trip going back.
I mean, you too.
Somewhere else, right?
Delaware. Assalamu alaikum. How you doing? Yes, she did. Yes, she did. Spell it for me.
A-I-S-H-A-H. A-I-S-H-A-H.
You remember that? So we clear, right?
What?
Me and you clear. No, I'm talking to him. Me and him clear.
You got 3 days to be mad at you.
I ain't mad at him.
You gotta get it up, so don't worry about it.
I ain't mad at him.
You gotta get it up after 3 days, Shay.
Tell her I said thank you. Alhamdulillah. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Okay, alhamdulillah rabbil alameen wa salatu wa salam ala ashrafil anbiya'i wal mursaleen wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. So, I'm going to take a couple of minutes, man, to do a couple of questions and answers, whether related to the book or otherwise. If you guys had any questions, any sisters downstairs that have any questions, ask the sisters downstairs if they have any questions. You can purchase the book through PayPal or through Cash App. PayPal, Imam Shadid Muhammad at Gmail, or Cash App, the Cash App sign, Shadid M. Rawdah, R-A-W-D-A-H. You said there was a page, somebody had pointed out a page or something.
Chapter 3.
I think somebody just took my book, man.
Personal joint?
Yeah.
No, what happened was I picked it up, autographed it, page, or you autographed it.
Oh, man. That was my friend. No, it's cool. I just didn't want to give somebody something I had already wrote in. I had made some notes in it.
You made notes in it? I seen it was been. I was like, wow. Oh, man.
That's cool.
A
few notes.
Came off all what?
This is called He Came to Perfect Moral Character, the persona of Prophet Muhammad through my eyes. It is a revised book. So, yeah, questions on the topic? Yeah, pretty much, please. Don't make me use too much of my brain right now. It's Sunday. We're supposed to be relaxing. Don't make me use too much of my brain right now. Any questions or comments, related to the topic?
No.
Thank you.
That was your time.
Anybody ask a question? I got one.
How did you come to Atlanta and I didn't know about it? Who is that? I don't know.
So look, if you go to
Page what?
136.
Uh-huh.
Setting
Right. 136. Okay, which paragraph?
I like that. Just the beginning.
The beginning of the
Just setting a biblical standard.
Okay.
Beginning of the chapter.
Okay. Words are very powerful, and how you structure your words will determine the response you will receive. There's an Arab proverb that reads, "Before the words leave your mouth, you are in control. Once they leave your mouth, they control you." Keep in mind that you are trying to bring the best out of them, even if through reprimand, and not simply reprimanding because you have the privilege of being a parent to a child who has erred. That's 135. Hassan al-Basri, I'm trying to work my way up to it. Hassan al-Basri, rahimahullah ta'ala, one of the most renowned scholars of the second generation after the Prophet's companions, the Tabi'een, was confronted by a woman who said she had a dream that all of her teeth fell out except one. She went to a scholar who knew how to interpret dreams, and he said to her, "All of your family will die and you will be left by yourself." Upon hearing this, she cried profusely. Not so much because of the interpretation of the dream, but because of the insensitive and emotionally dismissive manner in which it was conveyed to her. You understand? The reality of the matter is she knows that she's going to die, but when a person tells you very insensitively that, all your family going to die, you're going to be left alone, there's a dismissiveness. You're dismissing the person's, feelings about it and being a bit insensitive. Hassan al-Basri said to her, without a doubt, he was mistaken. That is not the interpretation of your dream. She said, "Please tell me then, what does it mean?" And he said, "You will live and your family will die." So basically, he said the same thing to her. He just said it in a different manner. The first person said, "All of your family going to die, you're going to be left alone." And he said he was mistaken. What it really means is that you will live and all of your family going to die. So it means the same exact thing. It's just the way that he's saying it to her with tact. There you go. It's done with tact. So she walked away delighted with the new and improved interpretation of her dream, which was actually the same interpretation, however, conveyed more innocuously. He led with what she wanted to hear and then conveyed the cold reality of her situation, which is more digestible when it comes to sharing news that is uncomfortable. Unfortunately, some people suffer from selective hearing and tend to focus only on or more on what will assuage their own conscience during conversation opposed to the reality of the situation. With respect to our children, we can be more effective as parents and get more positive responses from them if we would utilize this technique in our homes more often. We have to take into consideration that the first few sentences that come out of our mouths will determine most of the time how people react. Go ahead. Yeah. All right, so the first few sentences that come out of your mouth will usually determine how people are going to respond to you. They will either walk away feeling resilient enough to rebound from the situation, or feeling like the worst person in the world who can't seem to do anything right. Those are usually the two feelings that people have when they walk away from you. This method of setting realistic standards that people can live up to for the purpose of bringing out the best in people was used by the Prophet ﷺ with both the youth of the Sahaba and the elders in his community. Let's look at an example from the life of the Prophet ﷺ with one of the youth by the name of Mu'adh ibn Jabal. In order for us to actualize the intricacies of this incident, we have to consider that the Prophet ﷺ was somewhere in his late 50s during this particular time, while Mu'adh was merely a young teenager. The Prophet ﷺ had prior interactions with Mu'adh, so there was a rapport between them, which is another key component to being effective with teenagers. They have to have a rapport. If you want to be effective with teenagers, you have to develop a rapport with them. On one occasion, he allowed Mu'adh to ride on the back of his donkey, while there being nothing in between them, meaning no saddle. On another occasion, when Mu'adh was a little older and a bit wiser, the Prophet ﷺ sent him to Yemen with another young man by the name of Abu Musa al-Ash'ari to call people there to the religion of Islam, and other such incidents that demonstrate the rapport that was between the Prophet ﷺ and Mu'adh. Thus, Mu'adh was no stranger to the Prophet ﷺ, whose interactions were probably more extensive with him than any of the other young men from his community. However, the Prophet's humility and genuine concern for the young people in his community protected them from the dictates of the superiority complex that many leaders and parents suffer from today. In addition, his extraordinary approach to meeting people where they were contributed much to how people responded to his advice, including Mu'adh ibn Jabal. Once you condition your children to receive information from you in a certain manner, their response will always be the same, meaning you've conditioned them, whether positive or negative. Humans are creatures of habit. The same holds true as it relates to how spouses respond and relate to one another within the institution of marriage. This is why we are encouraged to provide our wives with the same comforts of living, both physically and financially, that they were used to prior to us marrying them, or better, essentially recreating the environments that they were used to will ensure, by the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a cohesive living condition where responses will be healthy and receptive. You see the beauty of Islam. Islam encourages men to marry women and provide for them in the same manner that their parents provided for them. All right? The same standards that they were used to. We are encouraged to provide those same standards. Why? Because when a woman is being given the same standards that she is used to, she's usually going to be receptive, and the relationship is usually going to be cohesive and healthy. Why? Because you've provided that same comfort zone. You've provided the same environment in which she was raised in. The same standards that she had for herself, you've come into her life and you've provided those same standards. So she's going to be more receptive to you. On the other hand, any approach that is foreign to what they are accustomed to will fall on deaf ears and render them unresponsive and the advice ineffective. To highlight this further, look at the response of the child who is raised in a home where the parents do not raise their voices or use profanity. If you take that same child and place them in the home of a step-parent or foster parent who yells at them and uses profanity, the child's response is going to be unresponsive and may even be uncooperative, because the manner in which it is being conveyed is foreign to them. All right, you take a child who's raised in your home, you don't use profanity when you talk to them, you don't raise your voice at them, right? And then maybe the parents separate or whatever, or the parent dies or whatever, and then that same parent marries someone else, right? And then this now new parent curses at them, uses profanity when he talks. The children are not going to be responsive. They're not going to respond because you are communicating with them in a manner that they are not used to. So it's important for us. Who I'm making this out to?
Sister Jamila. Yaqub.
The whole name? So it's important that, we communicate with people in a manner in which, that they're going to be responsive. They're going to, it's going to be effective. What's the last name? Yaqub?
Yaqub.
And as I said, I have the new book coming out at the end of this month, at the end of July, Blended Families. All right, I spoke a little bit about that yesterday. Blended families, we'll be talking about raising children in an unconventional family structure. Very important. Alhamdulillah, my pleasure. As painful as it was my pleasure. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you all for listening, your patience. So the same thing applies. So if there was any other pages or chapters that anyone had that they want me to read from or want me to explain, please let me know. I have about another 10, 15 minutes, inshallah.
I have one question I wanted to ask you.
Go ahead.
In regards to something you had said the last time you were here in regards to you said that if the scholars or, they came over to, you would not interpret anything for them again because of their neglect to bring about fatwa in areas dealing with the black communities. You said you would never interpret anything for them again, and I was trying to wonder what you meant by that in regards to, like I remember you talk about like whereas they tell us not to let our women work, but they allow their women to work and they don't have financial debts, school grants and stuff like that. When we try to avoid riba, and have been doing so, but at the same time we don't own nothing.
Right.
Following that,
Yes.
So, what?
So he's asking about a comment that I made about translating for scholars, and me saying that I would not translate for scholars anymore. That I used to do that, but I wouldn't do it anymore, and kind of reconciling with the fact that many of us were told to stay away from riba, stay away from interest, and we find a lot of people engaging in interests. Meanwhile, we don't own anything, we don't have anything. How do we reconcile that? Me saying that I wouldn't translate for scholars anymore is just my own personal approach. I feel that a lot of not to take anything away from their scholarship, not taking anything away from taking anything away from their level of knowledge and things like that. I just think that a lot of scholars have not shown interest in the African American Muslim community here in America, and are very quick to issue fatwas in terms of what we should do and what we shouldn't do, but know very little about the intricacies of our environment and what we go through. And I just feel like that there's a disconnect. There's a disconnect there. And until, a scholar has shown that they are actually concerned and actually care and actually want to come into our environment and, share our space and understand what it is we're going through and revise a lot of the fatwas, a lot of the Islamic rulings and verdicts that has been given to us, then, I'm not, I personally am not going to translate any of that, those, fatwas that are, just given callously without consideration of our, our situation. I'm not translating any of that and pushing that into our communities. I'm not doing that. As it relates to riba, interests, and, what we can do to start owning property and having things in our communities. And that's a big thing. I was actually having a conversation with a brother just a couple of days ago about this same issue. And that, you think about it for a second. We've been told, staying away from riba, staying away from interest has been shoved down our throats for years. For years, we've been told to stay away from interest. So that has forced many people not to go to college, has forced many people not to engage in the environments that we live in. Many of us don't get involved in politics. We don't have anything to do with politics, whether on a municipal, level or a national level. We don't get involved with the politics. We don't get involved in, the education, the board of education. We don't get involved in, public education. We don't, pulling our children, not putting them in public schools. We're not infiltrating the public school system and beginning to, demand that our needs as Muslims be met by, the public school system, by the board of education. We've been told that, we have to stay away from interests, on all levels without any consideration. And so therefore many, families are still renting apartments. Many families are still renting homes. And the thing about it is that when you think about it for a second, when you're renting a home, you're renting your home from someone. You understand?
Killing you.
The thing is that you are renting a home from someone, that is paying a mortgage, right? So essentially, you are paying the mortgage. You are paying the mortgage. So if his mortgage is $700 a month, and he's charging you $1,500 a month rent, you paying his mortgage and you putting money in his pocket. Meanwhile, you're paying rent because you don't want, right? And at the end of the day, he can say, I want my house back. You got to go terminating your lease, and now you got to go find another home to live. I mean, it's just ridiculous. The other day I seen on Twitter, and he was asked about, riba and, housing and things like that. And he's a beast when it comes to that stuff. If you need to know anything as it relates to, owning homes and interests and things like that, go see Joe Bradford on Twitter. Joe Bradford on Twitter. He's a graduate from the Islamic University. His concentration is finances, but the boy is thorough, whether in Aqidah, fiqh, you name it, the boy is thorough. You know what I mean? And alhamdulillah, I follow him on Twitter, and, alhamdulillah, he puts out a lot of beneficial information as it relates to finances. And so he was asked the other day about, whether or not we can rent homes or own homes or whatever the case may be. And he said, the reason why we ask these questions of whether or not I can own a home because of riba is because we're caught in this binary of halal and haram. And that's all we see. We see the world through halal, haram. We don't see anything else. We don't see, the five, what they call the five basic necessities of every human being, right? We don't think about it from a jurisprudence perspective, usul fiqh principles and things like that. Our lives are tied in between this binary of halal and haram. It's either halal or haram. We don't see anything else. And I thought that was just so profound, the way that he broke that joint down like that, because that's exactly how Islam is fed to us from Saudi Arabia. Is Saudi Arabia feeds us Islam through this binary of halal, haram. Scholars don't ever talk about fiqh. They don't ever talk about fiqh principles that broadens the scope of our little lives that are in between these binaries of, halal and haram. We see the entire world in front of us. Is it halal? Can I do it? Is it haram? Can I do it? And we don't see anything else in between. When the religion of Islam is not just between halal and haram. There are matters in between. Like, we got to fill in the blanks with fiqh. There's halal on one end, haram on the other end. And in between, there's the fiqh of the religion. All right, but our so-called leaders don't understand fiqh. Our so-called leaders who are feeding us this narrative about Islam, this binary narrative of Islam, is always between halal and haram. Riba is haram, stay away from it. Just like that. One statement, no fiqh issues, no usul fiqh issues, no details, no nothing. Halal, haram, that's it. That's it. And that's part of the problem. So meanwhile, you have Muslims from other countries who move here, buy big, humongous homes. They build big, humongous masjids. And that's not to say that they are the standard and what they're doing makes it right. But at some point, something has to give. We still sitting here without a pot to piss in, a window to throw it out of, talking about something that's halal and haram and staying away from this and staying away from that. And we don't have anything. We have nothing. Most of our masajid, man, is just, it's just a hole in the wall. You know what I mean? That we barely even, own. We don't own none of it. We're still renting places that we call masjids. Meanwhile, you got Muslims in, all parts of New Jersey got huge, humongous facilities, man. $1 million chandeliers. They raising money during Ramadan and expanding. And, meanwhile, we got a little hole in the wall. And we ain't never going to build a community like that. We ain't never going to build a community like that, ever. We'll always be, the little pit stop masjid. You stop, you pray, and you keep it moving. But there's no communities that are flourishing, that are developing, that are growing from those type of environments. And, here we are. Constantly being put at the bottom of the totem pole because we're abused because of our sincerity. I totally wholeheartedly believe that African American Muslims in more particular are the most sincere people, and our sincerity is exploited and taken advantage of. We come into Islam, especially those of us who are converts to Islam. We come into Islam and we're just sincere. We want to follow everything by the book. We want to follow all the rules and do everything the right way. Meanwhile, you have other cultures that are circumventing, the halal and the haram and, doing exactly what the Jews, what Bani Israel did, finding loopholes in the religion to live their best life. Meanwhile, we sincere, trying to practice the Quran and the Sunnah to the best of our ability, and we don't have nothing. Have nothing. And we can't build anything. We can't build anything like that. So, someone pointed out page 83. Good intention and wrong action is an oxymoron in the Islamic tradition. The concept of the end justifying the means is not supported by Islamic texts from the Quran nor the Sunnah. Rather, Prophet Muhammad ﷺ harshly reprimanded one of his companions, Usama ibn Zayd, for killing a non-Muslim combatant who, despite uttering the Shahadatain, was killed anyway. When the Prophet ﷺ reproached him, asking if he had killed the man after he testified to the oneness of Allah, Usama replied, he only said it because he knew I was about to kill him. Clearly, Usama had the best of intentions. However, his actions were not aligned with the Islamic protocols of war. So having good intention and doing wrong action, that does not justify. The action has to be right and the intention has to be right. Akhlasu wa aswabu. As the scholars, they say, your intention got to be correct and your action has to be in accordance with the Sunnah. So just saying that I had good intention does not make it right. Usama had the best of intentions. However, his action went against the protocols of war in Islam. You don't kill a person after they take their shahada. La ilaha illallah. As the Prophet told Usama, did you cut his heart open to see whether he really believed? That's not your call. You don't get to determine whether or not a person really believed or not. That's not your place. If the person said La ilaha illallah, then you back away from him. The Islamic protocol is that once a person take their shahada, their blood is unlawful. Their blood is haram. The Prophet ﷺ said there's three things that is unlawful, is haram, is sacred from one Muslim to another. Maluhu wa dammuhu wa irduhu. His wealth, his honor, and his blood. All of those three things are sacred. The moment you take your shahada, I cannot spill your blood, I cannot talk about you behind your back, and I cannot take your money unjustly from you. All of these things are sacred. So, in truth, Muslims residing in Western countries are the ones who catch the brunt of the blame for many of the heinous acts carried out in the name of Islam. They are unfairly viewed as terrorists themselves, while those responsible for these acts of terrorism rejoice at their perceived victory. What they don't realize is that they are in fact assisting the very same people they've indicted as enemies of Islam in the destruction of the religion in the West. So let's look at a few examples from the life of the Prophet ﷺ that demonstrates his genuine interest in those who lived around or in his community, regardless of their socioeconomic status or tribal affiliations. This unique approach created an environment of comfort and security for those of his followers, as well as those who, although shared the same space, did not share the same religion. It allowed ordinary people to develop a genuine relationship with him based upon the positive energy he exuded, not because of the reputation that preceded him. Arguments would ensue between his companions about who had more right to claim him as their leader. A woman by the name of Asma bint Umais, who migrated to Ethiopia during the early years of Islam, returned with many of the Sahaba who wanted to reside with him in Medina. Upon arriving in Medina, she heard people claiming that they were more deserving of the Prophet's companionship than others. They justified their sentiments of entitlement by virtue of their migration with him from Mecca to Medina. So Asma went to visit one of the wives of the Prophet by the name of Hafsa, the daughter of Umar bin Khattab. Umar entered the house of Hafsa while Asma was present and inquired as to who she was. So Hafsa replied that she was Asma bint Umais. Umar then asked if she was one of those who migrated to Ethiopia and had recently returned to Medina, to which Asma replied that she was. So Umar said to her, expressing his sense of entitlement, "We are more deserving of the Messenger of Allah than you." Upon hearing this, Asma became extremely irate and shouted, "No, by Allah, you were with the Messenger of Allah, and he fed the hungry from amongst you and educated the ignorant from amongst you, while we were in the land far away, detesting the fact that we had to relocate all for the sake of Allah and his Messenger. I swear by Allah, I will not eat one morsel of food, nor will I drink anything until I inform the Messenger of Allah of what you said. We were persecuted and in fear of our lives. I will mention what you said to the Prophet and ask him about this. By Allah, I will neither lie on you, nor will I add anything to your statement, nor will I subtract anything from it." This is that sense of entitlement, right? Sometimes people say, "Well, I've been Muslim for 20 years. So what is that like? So does that detract from, my value in the community because you've been Muslim longer than I have? Umar said, we are more deserving of the Prophet than you are. She's like, the Prophet ﷺ was with y'all. He fed the hungry. He educated y'all the ignorant from amongst you. Meanwhile, we're in Ethiopia, and far from our land, in fear of our lives, living in a foreign country. Meanwhile, you guys are with the Prophet. How dare you? This sense of entitlement that we have, So this entire ordeal was over who was more entitled to be entitled to the Prophet ﷺ, which shows us a degree of love that they had for him. Asma was willing to forsake her food and her drink until she got the answer that she needed that would dispel the misunderstanding of Umar and others who shared his sense of entitlement. When she finally met the Prophet ﷺ, she informed him of Umar's statement, to which he said, with all sincerity and frankness, "They are not more deserving than you. He and his companions have only one migration from Mecca to Medina, while you have two migrations from Mecca to Ethiopia and then from Ethiopia to Medina." Can you imagine her sigh of relief after hearing the Prophet's statement? She said that all those who migrated with her to Ethiopia began coming to her to hear the Prophet's statement directly from her, although she was not someone of a special status in the community. So by the Prophet actually just saying that to her, made her now an authority, because everybody's now want to come and hear it directly from her. And she wasn't anybody in the community. She was not even known in Medina, seeing as though she had just arrived, but the statement of the Prophet ﷺ made her feel as if she was just as important as any of the other companions who had earned a position of status in the community for one extraordinary reason or another. This incident demonstrates the great interpersonal skills of the Prophet ﷺ, which created an atmosphere of comfort and cohesion around him. It has the propensity to make people feel safe and self-confident, especially when they sense that you are just as interested and concerned with what is important to them as they are to themselves. All right, this is, the Prophet ﷺ, he had a way of just making people feel comfortable around him. He had a way of creating an environment in the community where everybody felt like they was on the same level. And this is the type of environments that we need to create in our masajid. When people come in, you want them to feel just as important. Like, you're not a nobody because you're just visiting. You are just as important in the community as anyone else. I mean, you had certain scholars. I remember meeting certain scholars, and they would embrace you and hug you and shake your hand and ask you how you were doing, as if y'all went to high school together. Like you guys have known each other for years. They just had a way of making you feel like you were on par with everybody else. And so the Prophet ﷺ was very good at that. Can you imagine, Asma, she returning from Ethiopia, and he says this to her. Now everybody's looking to get the narration directly from her. She now becomes an authority, to some degree. She now becomes important because of that short conversation she had with the Prophet ﷺ. So now everybody who traveled from Ethiopia back to Medina want to come to her and hear the narration from her directly. So, very important, man, for us to make people important, make people feel important. Humble yourself, making other people feel important. Zig Ziglar, he said, very famous self-help guy. He said, you can have everything you want in the world. All you got to do is give everybody else what they want. You get anything you want. Just give other people what they want. Make other people feel important, and your importance will automatically come into fruition just because you made somebody else feel important. And people don't forget. When you make people feel important, they don't forget. They remember that. Years after you, I don't even remember you, but that little interaction that you had with that person for that moment changed their whole, everything. So I got time for one more section. Anybody got a page or a section of the book that they want to hear? Bilal, Imam, you said you had some place in there. Let's talk about this example, the man who raised his voice in the presence of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Page 87. Page 87. All right. This particular incident took place after a verse from the Quran was revealed, teaching the companions of the Prophet ﷺ the appropriate manner of speaking in his noble presence. The Quran states, "O you who believe, do not raise your voices over the voice of the Prophet, nor speak to him in a loud tone as you speak loud to one another, lest you render your deeds null and void while you realize it not." There was a companion by the name of Thabit ibn Qais, who was a poet and who would also give sermons in the absence of the Prophet ﷺ. He used to give khutbahs in the absence of the Prophet ﷺ. He had a naturally loud voice, and when this verse was revealed, he considered it to be in reference to him. He thought the ayat was about him. He said regretfully, "By Allah, I am the one who is in the habit of raising my voice over the voice of the Messenger of Allah, and I fear that Allah is displeased with me for doing so." He began avoiding the company of the Prophet ﷺ in the masjid and remained in his home. He was bothered by the fact that the revelation of the verse was somehow due to his perceived ill manners in the company of the Prophet ﷺ. And since we are on the topic of self-improvement, notice how he took the verse and he applied it to him first. He said, this verse applies to me. All right? This is something that many Muslims have lost sight of today. We live in an artificially perfect world made possible by the many advancements in technology that allow us to capture the illusion that everything is perfect when it's not. We take verses from the Quran and instead of applying them to ourselves, we apply them to everyone else. We use verses from the Quran and traditions from the Sunnah as ammunition against everyone else, which is actually counterproductive to the concept of self-improvement, something the companions diligently aspired to. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was a man dedicated to perfecting every layer of his moral well-being. When he looked in the mirror, he was more concerned about who he was on the inside rather than who he was on the outside. He would supplicate, "O Allah, just as you have perfected my body outwardly, perfect my character inwardly. Allahumma kama ahsanta khalqi fa ahsan khuluqi." Prophet Muhammad ﷺ noticed Thabit's absence from the masjid, which also demonstrates another quality of his extraordinary leadership. He was not so engrossed in his responsibilities that he couldn't recognize when one of his companions was missing. Thabit was not a close relative of his, nor was there some personal relationship between them. However, he showed a special interest in him as well as others for reasons that were well beyond the scope of his immediate mission. Thabit was just a companion from the thousands of companions that he showed a genuine interest in. This was just the natural decorum of a man whose mission was to challenge the status quo in the realm of leadership by concentrating on the moral excellence of his followers. In response to his absence, the Prophet sent some of his companions to Thabit's house to find out why he had been avoiding the masjid and sitting in his company. Thabit regretfully replied, "I fear that I am from the people of the hellfire. I am of those who used to raise their voice in the presence of the Prophet ﷺ." This is similar to people who commit sin, who do things that are wrong and then stop coming to the masjid, avoid coming to the masjid, right? And then when we see them, instead of kind of trying to make them feel better and bring them back to the masjid, we continue to ostracize them and push them further and further away from the masjid, right? Instead of seeing that someone is not coming to the masjid regularly, we don't say, "Wow, let me go find out why this brother's not coming. Hey, brother, I want to see your face in the masjid, man. I miss seeing you in the masjid." We don't do that. We see the person's not coming and we just automatically assume that the person is back to their old ways and they need to stay where they are. We ostracize the person from the masjid. And that's not fair because, it's like you already doing a good job of beating yourself up. I don't need you to do that. I do a good job of that myself. He's beating himself up. He said, "I am from the people of the hellfire." He's already condemned himself to hell. I am from the people of the hellfire. I am of those who raise his voice in the presence of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When the companions returned to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam with Thabit's reply, he told them to inform him that he was in fact from the people of paradise. Now, mind you, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam could not say that without authority, previous authority from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that means that Allah revealed that to him. Allah described the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, وَمَا يَنْتِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ. He does not speak from his own desires. So the Prophet couldn't have just said he was from the people of paradise had Allah not revealed it to him. So that means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually mentioned that Thabit was from the people of Jannah. So the companions, and he told them to inform him that he was in fact from the people of paradise. The companions used to say that they saw Thabit as a man from the inhabitants of paradise walking among them on the earth. SubhanAllah. Eventually, Thabit was martyred during the battle of Yamama and will enter into paradise just as the Prophet ﷺ promised. He didn't have to send some of the Sahaba to his home to find out why he was avoiding the masjid, nor did he have to send them back to his house to console him with the glad tidings of Jannah. However, the genuine concern Prophet Muhammad ﷺ had for his companions is what drove him to always go the extra mile, as Allah described him, and indeed we have sent you, O Muhammad, only as a mercy for all of mankind. That was his nature. And as I said during Ramadan, that we lead with compassion. That should be our motto. Lead with compassion. Lead with mercy. Let the first thing that people experience from being in your presence is compassion and mercy. Let the first thing that people experience is anything from you. It doesn't require a lot of energy to be merciful and to be compassionate with someone. That doesn't require a lot of energy. It doesn't require you to spend any money. You can be merciful and compassionate without spending a dime. But the return on that investment is magnificent. You never know how your words or how your behavior is going to affect somebody in a positive way. That's going to come back and be beneficial for you on the Day of Judgment. You never know. Right? You never know. So, inshallah ta'ala, hopefully we'll have other opportunities to, and believe it or not, I made dua over this book. I never thought that writing this would have this level of impact. You know what I mean? I never thought that it would have this level of impact. It was just me, just trying something different. I looked out into all of the Islamic material and, translation by Sheikh Salih Fawzan, translation of this. And these are all just the words of scholars from where they sit in their position of scholarship. I'm writing this as someone who converted to Islam, went to school, studied Islam, and then had an opportunity to look at the life of the Prophet. So one of the things that I appreciate about going to the Islamic University is that in the College of Hadith, we learn to love the Prophet ﷺ on levels that no other student in the university learned. Our entire lives for the 4 years that I was in the College of Hadith was centered around the life of the Prophet ﷺ. Studying Hadith is not studying just his words and his sayings. You're studying his entire life. His entire life. His descriptions. I can give you a description of the Prophet ﷺ as if you were looking right at him. Narrations that describe him, his hair, his face, his body, his shoulders, his walk, his talk, his hands, everything. Everything. We learned every single aspect of the Prophet ﷺ's life. So studying in the College of Hadith, it was a training course for learning about the Prophet ﷺ's life on a level that I would never be able to repay the Islamic University for what it gave me. I would never be able to repay the Islamic, and this was all for free. Islamic University is free. You go there on a scholarship. They actually pay you to go to the university. They pay you. They give you a stipend every month. Give you free round-trip tickets from Saudi Arabia back to America and then back to Saudi Arabia after the summer is over. Every year. Provides you with a student housing building where you can live and sit amongst scholars, just walking distance from the Prophet ﷺ's masjid. I mean, what more could you ask for? Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. What more could you ask for, man? So, for that, I am great. I am profoundly grateful for that, man, because you would never be able to get that anywhere else. See, the difference between knowledge and ignorance is that knowledge broadens your understanding. Knowledge broadens your scope, while ignorance keeps you in this little box. That's all you know is that box. I remember when I wasn't a student and I was sitting in classes and, just a normal 9-to-5 Muslim. I cried often because I realized that I would never be able to get to a certain point in my knowledge unless I went and studied abroad. That I could read 1,000,000 books, but until you learn the Arabic language opens up a whole nother portal for you into the world of knowledge that you will never be able to gain access to unless you understand the Arabic language. You will be restricted to English interpretations of other people's words, and you will never be able to have access to that information yourself.
It's funny that you said that because we was talking last night in the masjid, talking about why we want to learn the Arabic language. We want to learn it for that reason there. So we won't be subjected to other people's
interpretation. And that's why the subtitle is, the persona of Prophet Muhammad through my eyes, because now I got an opportunity to go in, learn about who he was and who, for myself, without somebody else telling me who he is. I could grab a book and tell you, and the sheikh said here, and what the sheikh is saying here, I'm regurgitating to you what somebody else is saying in a book. That's all I'm doing. Whereas you could learn the language and go to the same sources that they went to, and that's what I wanted. I wanted to be able to go to the same sources, that books that we've been reading for years from scholars, where they're giving us their interpretation. Even if they quote an ayat or hadith, they're still explaining it in their words. You know what I mean? So it's like you're restricted. Ignorance is a restriction. Knowledge gives you access. And believe it or not, this is one of the reasons why, right? This is one of the reasons why a lot of us make so many mistakes. This is one of the reasons why divorce is such a huge thing in our communities, because of ignorance. When you're ignorant, when you don't know anything else, you're only restricted to doing things one way. When you have knowledge, then you realize that there are so many other options that you have. I'll give you an example, and I'll end with this. The hadith where the Prophet ﷺ, he sent his companions on a journey. And on the journey, one of the companions, he had a gash on his head. And he woke up one morning and he had nocturnal emission. He had a wet dream. He had to make a ghusl. So he was saying to the companions that if I make a ghusl, I fear that the water is going to get into the gash and it's going to cause me harm. The Sahaba were saying, no, water's available. You have to make wudu. You have to make a ghusl with water. He made ghusl with water and died. That's the result of not having access. You understand? Because when they got back to Medina, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, أَلَا تَسْأَلُوا إِذَا لَمْ تَعْلَمُوا. Wouldn't it have been sufficient for you to just ask if you didn't know? أَلَيْسَ شِفَاءَ الْعَيْءِ السُّؤَالِ. Isn't the cure for ignorance a question? Ignorance is a disease. The cure for it is, if you don't know, ask. He said it would have been sufficient for him to make tayammum. But when you don't know any better, you only restrict yourself to doing things one way, because that's all you know. The Prophet ﷺ said he could have simply made tayammum. Why did the Prophet know that and they didn't know that? Because he had access. That's what knowledge gives you, access. Ignorance restricts you to doing things one way because that's all you know. It's a restriction. It's a hindrance. Whereas knowledge broadens your understanding of the world, brothers and sisters. The greatest thing that you can do for yourself after becoming a Muslim is learning your religion. I kid you not. I hated the fact that as a new Muslim, I had to run to this imam and run to that imam. Abu Muslima, Abu Osama, this one, and then you're getting all these conflicting reviews, conflicting views. And the reason why you are getting conflicting reviews is not because any sin or anything wrong with the imams that you were going to, but everybody's giving you their narrative. And you don't have enough knowledge to create the narrative yourself. You know what I mean? Like, I don't have to do that today. I can go to the same sources that these great scholars that we quote, I can go to the same sources that they go to. I don't need you to tell me what Fawzan said. Tell me where Fawzan got the information from, and I'll go there and I'll research the issue myself. That's no slight on him as a scholar, but his level of scholarship is not necessarily for me. The Islamic University prepared me to be on the same level of scholarship or greater, depending on how far I want to go with that. Islamic University gave me the tools that I don't have to be subject to somebody else's version of Islam. That's what knowledge does. It liberates you. That's what knowledge does. I'm not binded by the shackles of blind following this person or that person. And that's not to say that I'm some type of mujtahid and, I'm going to make it all up as I go along. No, there's some areas where I have to blind follow. Maybe because I don't have the time to research, or maybe I don't have the resources to research a particular issue. So, yeah, I may have to blind follow a scholar in this particular area or that area, but that's not my whole deen does not revolve around blind following one scholar or the other. It doesn't. It doesn't. So, and I mean, the thing about it is that maybe if a person doesn't go to the Islamic University, maybe they may not have the resources to gain that particular level of knowledge, but you do have the ability to remove yourself from being a complete layman and accepting the narration of somebody else and creating your own. And that's what empowerment is. A boss wants you to work for them all the time. Will never put you in a position to be independent of them. And that's what some of our students of knowledge have done. They spoon feed you crumbs, and you will always be a follower of them. And then there are leaders who want you to be independent. I don't want you to blind follow me. I want you to be able to go to the same sources where I go and develop your own opinions. Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala said, وَدِدْتُ أَنَّ النَّاسِ كُلَّهُمْ يَعْرِفُونَ هَذَا الْعِلْمِ لِأَنْ لَا يَنْسِبْ إِلَيَّ شَيْءٍ. He said, I wish that everyone had the same level of knowledge that I have, so no one would attribute anything to me. Don't say Shafi'i told me that. Don't say Shafi'i taught me that. No, I want everybody to be on the same level. That's empowerment. I want us all to be on the same level. I want us all to be able to go into conversations about deep fiqh issues and sitting here and having differences of opinions and, and then coming to a mutual understanding. Even if we disagree, I disagree with you respectfully because I see that you took a different position than I did based upon knowledge, not on ignorance. It becomes hard for me to communicate with somebody who don't have knowledge because you taking an opposition to me based upon jahl, based upon ignorance. If you take a position, as Sheikh Al-Albani said, if a person opposes me following Quran and Sunnah, I have nothing but the utmost respect for them because that's what you're supposed to do. But taking an oppositional position to me based upon your own desires or based upon what somebody else told you, that becomes problematic for me. You know what I mean? Because now you arguing with me based upon somebody else's opinion. I can't have that conversation with you. Don't sit here and say, well, Sheikh Al-Albani said, or Sheikh Fulan said, because I'm not arguing what those imams said. Those great imams and their positions that they have. I'm not arguing with you on that. I'm going to the root of the issue myself. You sit here telling me what another imam said or another sheikh said, trying to get me to change my opinion using big names like Fawzan and Uthaymeen and Fulan. That is not going to make me change my opinion. That's not going to make me change my opinion. You understand? If I went in and I studied the issue for myself, and this was the conclusion that I arrived at, if I explained my conclusion to Albani or Uthaymeen or any of these respected imams, they would disagree with me respectfully, because I would quote to them the dalil that helped me to arrive at the position and they would have nothing but the utmost respect for me.
What did the modest messages say?
You understand? We've arrived at different positions, but using the same textual evidences. So don't argue with me by saying, well, you know what Fawzan said over here, and then when you say, well, respectfully, I don't agree with Fawzan. Well, who are you to disagree with Fawzan? He's a big imam. Or what? It's like, who am I not to? I don't have a right to an opinion? If that works for you, then okay. Every position that you find of Fawzan, you want to follow that, be my guest. As for myself, I didn't graduate with a degree for me to blind follow any imam or any sheikh. Our teachers didn't teach us that. Professors in the university did not teach us that. They didn't hand me a degree from the prestigious Islamic University of Medina for me to come home and blind follow what this sheikh said or that sheikh said. That's not what I was given a degree for. I was given a degree as a sign that I have the ability to go into the text myself and come out with a conclusion that is based upon what I understood. Allah's not going to hold me accountable for what Fawzan understood or what Uthaymeen understood or what Bin Baz understood. Allah's going to hold me accountable for what I understood. Because I have the ability to go in, study the issue for myself. You understand? That is what I am responsible for. The opinions that I hold, someone sent me an opinion, oh, you telling people to take pictures of themselves on the Eid and pictures are haram or whatever. I don't hold that pictures are haram. So you're going to superimpose on me what you believe? You believe pictures are haram based upon a fatwa that you read from this sheikh or that sheikh. You ain't studied no dalil. Bring me one dalil where it says pictures, the still images that we take on a camera, that is haram. What you have from the Sunnah is images. Images during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, are they the same images that we have here today on the camera cell phone? No, they're not. No, they're not. So don't email me or message me or inbox me saying, oh, astaghfirullah, we respect you as an imam, but you're telling people to take pictures of themselves and post it on the internet and pictures are haram. Pictures are haram to you. I don't hold that pictures, still images from a camera phone, I don't hold that they are haram. I don't hold that they are haram. That's not my position. You understand? Nor was it the position of Sheikh Muhammad ibn Salih al-Uthaymeen. Go read Sheikh Uthaymeen's position on images. It's right there on the internet. But then when I say, okay, that's my position, then it's like, but Fawzan said, or Fulan said, or Fulan said, I don't care. With all due respect to those imams, don't superimpose on me what you believe because of your limited understanding. You have a limited amount of knowledge, so therefore you are obligated to take what a scholar tells you. I am not. I am not. He is not a mufti. He is not, the Prophet ﷺ, he does not superimpose on me as a student of knowledge to take his position. He states his facts, presents his dalil, and then I have the opportunity to look at that dalil and juxtapose the other dalil and then come out with my own conclusion. But see, that's the end result of ignorance. And I don't even respond to all of the people who sent me the messages, oh, images are haram, and you telling people that. I never even responded to them. Because you can't argue with somebody that's ignorant. They'll conquer you in every argument.
They're just like, they say politics here, demonstration here is haram, right? And me looking at it is not, because our situation is different. When the hadith, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam told the companions, do not invoke against the Muslim rulers. There's not Muslim rulers here in America.
And not only that, with the issue of protesting, the thing is that part of our Constitution is the right for peaceful protest. That's part of our law. That's part of what is given to us as a right here as an American citizen. Now in Saudi Arabia, these are monarchies. These people these environments do not allow. So what they do here again, superimposing on us what goes on in somebody else's country. You cannot peacefully protest in Saudi Arabia, in any of the Gulf states. You can't even peaceful protest in Egypt anymore. They don't even allow that after the Arab Spring. They don't even allow that anymore. You can't even congregate. Too many people gathering in one place in a particular public place starts to, signal things that, and they got to break it up. In our society, in our environment, it's not like that. Peaceful protesting has gotten things done.
Exactly.
You understand? It does work.
Sure.
It does work. So, here again, but these things are always going to be problems for us in our society because here again, when you are liberated from your fear, you liberate everybody else. And as long as you can keep these people in fear, we're afraid of riba, so we don't go into housing, we don't go to college. We're fear, of wearing this, a fear of doing that, fear of doing this. So you're constantly living in fear, and we live in a free country. You understand what I'm saying? Like, that is the oxymoron of our setup, our dynamic as African American Muslims. We live in a free country, and we're constantly living in fear of our religion. You understand? Think about how oxymoronic that is. You would think as American Muslims, we would be the most liberal Muslims on the planet. But you believe it or not, we are actually way more conservative than Arab Muslims and Indo-Pak Muslims that come from other countries, right? And come here. They are more liberal than we will ever be. And they come from monarchies. You understand? They come from monarchies that are, totalitarian states, where the head of the state runs it for 20 years, and the laws and the rules that they put in place have to be abided by, even if they go against the Quran and the Sunnah, you understand? And they come here more liberal, and we are conservative, fear Allah, stay within this little, nah, man, no, sorry. We fear this fear, we can lift this fear off of us through knowledge. The more knowledge that we have. Go, if you are having any questions about buying a home or riba, interest, go see Joe Bradford on Twitter, man. Go see Joe Bradford. He's written many articles about riba, about interests and homes and things like that. Please educate yourselves. Stop living in fear. Stop living in fear by shallow, limited understanding of, students of knowledge who would much prefer to live, a Saudi lifestyle here in America instead of embracing the environment that we live in and using the religion to help us navigate, the environments that we live in, man. اللهم استعان وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. You guys have been great. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you all. And as always, man, mashallah, it's been great.